I'm Annie Kneeland Haggerty Shaw. I'm glad that you've come. You'll forgive me. I'm not a public speaker. I've always been a private person, and I haven't been seeing many people at all this year. But today, I very much wanted to invite you here. Here, my family home. 1 year and 2 months ago, my husband, Colonel Robert Gould Shaw, and I came here for our honeymoon. May 3rd, 1863. The second happiest day of my life. The first being the day before. Our wedding day. For a while, we didn't think that day was going to happen. Our parents were concerned for us. With Rob being in the war, the future was so uncertain. And Rob had just been given a great challenge to train and lead the 54th Massachusetts in battle, the first federal regiment of free Negroes to be formed after President Lincoln ended slavery on New Year's Day, 1863. I know my mother was thinking of my future happiness. Rob's mother thought that marriage might distract him from his duties. For her, Rob's commission was the fulfillment of a great dream, a lifetime of work in the struggle to end slavery. That her son would lead black soldiers into battle for their country and prove to the world that Negroes were courageous and would fight like other men for their freedom might have been an answer to a prayer for her. Neither Rob nor I were sure that this could be proved, but we were very sure that no matter what the future might bring, our love would only make Rob stronger and braver than ever. I know that we were right. Today is July 28th, 1864. The paper says that our army has had another victory against rebel troops in Ezra Church, Georgia. General Sherman is driving the battle south, his army scorching the earth before it all the way to the sea. People say the tide of the war has turned. Future of the Union looks bright. Our Union. May 2nd, 1863. Mr. and Mrs. Ogden Haggerty joyfully invite you to witness the union of their daughter, Annie Kneeland, and Colonel Robert Gould Shaw in holy matrimony at the Church of the Ascension, 5th Avenue and 10th Street, New York, New York, at 10 o'clock in the morning. On the most beautiful spring day I can remember. And so it was beautiful in Lenox, too. Our whole week here together was a wedding present from the world, I said. Only a month before, Rob had written to his mother, "If I thought that being married were going to make me neglect my duty, I should think it much better never to have been engaged. Indeed, one reason for my wishing to be married is that we are going to undertake a very dangerous piece of work, and I feel that there are more chances than ever of my not getting back. I know I should go away more happy and contented if we were married. I showed Annie your letter, to which I suppose you have no objections." We had met the year before at the Opera in New York. Rob was already an officer with the 2nd Massachusetts Infantry, home on a short leave. I was a friend of Rob's sisters, Susannah and Ellen. Susie thought it would be a lark if she surprised her brother with a mysterious Miss Haggerty in their opera party that evening. Rob made it a point to be especially gallant and charming to me all evening. He teased a lot, which made me very flustered. But then he would be immediately very sorry and insisted on kissing my hand repeatedly by way of apology. He had such a twinkle in his eye whenever he did this. It seemed we had a lot to say to each other right from the very beginning. When Rob marched out to war with the 2nd Massachusetts, we began to write. His first letters told me he had some growing up to do. Camp near Sharpsburg, Maryland, November 23rd, 1862. Dear Annie, your letter of Sunday the 16th was sent down to me last night on the river where I was on picket. It was very cold, windy, and snowy down there, but it made me warm and comfortable to hear from you again so soon. I was so glad you didn't think it necessary to wait until you got my answer to your first before writing again. I felt wicked when I told you I wanted to see you even more than Mother, for I have always loved her more than anyone else in the world, and I think she has me from the sacrifices she has made for me and for which I can never repay her. But it was true, nevertheless, like everything I have written to you, and a great deal more besides. For my feelings to you have been almost the same since the first evening I saw you in New York. If it is possible, I shall get a furlough. Good night, dear Annie. Please write to me soon again. I needed to think about this. I allowed a week or two to pass while I did so. November 28, 1862, near Sharpsburg, Maryland. Dear Annie, your letter of the 16th was the last I got from you or anyone else, so I am sadly in want of a mail. Yesterday was Thanksgiving, and we managed to have a very pleasant day. There would have been no drawback if we hadn't missed from the table so many faces which were there last year at this time. This made the dinner a very quiet affair compared with most bachelor parties. It is very strange and unfortunate that the officers that have been killed were the very best we had, both as comrades and as military men. No doubt after a man is dead, his virtues only are remembered, but in our case, the dead ones really were the best. The other day, I came across the grave of a man named Calvin Jones from Pittsfield, Massachusetts, a private in some regular regiment. Did you ever hear of any such individual? He was killed in a skirmish just after the Battle of the Antietam. Our camp is close by the great battlefield, and our principal recreation has been to ride over it and see the places where we fought and where our men were killed. There is hardly a tree near without several bullets and cannonballs in it, and some of the neighboring buildings are perforated in every direction. The place is full of graves, 30 or 40 men together in some of them, often without even a board to mark the place. A great many of the men's bodies have been taken up and carried home, but I should think the friends who see them would wish they had been left in their graves. Goodbye for the present. Always affectionately yours, Rob. I never imagined that I would know what war was really like. My life had always been safe and filled with comfort. A beautiful home, my friends and parents around me, concerts, the opera, the theater, and the lectures we attended that taught us about others not so fortunate. We all believed that slavery was evil, and that the great reason to fight the South was to bring slavery in America to an end. Truthfully, though, most of us really knew nothing about colored people, and I fear that we looked upon them not too much differently than the Southerners seem to, as childlike and somehow not as capable or intelligent as people with white skin. Rob had grown up much like me, with plenty of everything. He was educated at Harvard, traveled in Europe, a job in the family business until he had enlisted in the Army. He might have chosen a civilian life and stayed comfortable and safe too. But though he did not always express the passion against injustice that his parents and sisters did, I believe his actions said all there is to say. Rob's letters brought home the reality of the war, justified by the great cause in whose name it was fought, in a way that lectures and discussions never could. While others made speeches from the safety of their podiums and pulpits, Rob was out there, in the snow and the rain, being fired upon and firing back, fighting with guns and swords. He was 24. Through our letters, I began to love him. Fairfax Station, Virginia, December 18th, 1862. Dear Annie, it is little over a week since I wrote. Since then, I have moved to Virginia on receipt of the news that Burnside had evacuated Fredericksburg. It is a terrible thing that so many lives should have been lost for nothing. We had a little snowstorm yesterday, and last night was the coldest we have had. It takes some time to accustom oneself to sleeping in the open air in winter. In washing this morning, I wet my head as usual, and when I went to comb my hair, it was all frozen up. Fairfax Station, December 21st, 1862. Your letter of the 9th reached me yesterday. This is the first time I've heard from you since December 1st, and your letter really gave me a great deal of pleasure. As you say, snow is a very different thing to us from what it is to you, especially since our tents have been taken from us. In spite of all the discomforts, there are many charms about our life. We lie looking at the stars through the trees, listening to the men singing, which is often very good, or talking about what we shall do when the war is over and the scenes we have been through since it began. There are only a dozen of our old officers left, and I often wonder how many there will be when we go home. We don't know where we are going next. The useless battle at Fredericksburg seems to have thrown things into confusion. You must excuse my writing today, Annie, for my fingers are perfectly stiff and my ink freezes every little while. We could always write to each other of so many things, the way the war was going and the strategies of the generals on both sides, and how wise or stupid those strategies might be. The books we read and shared with each other, Shakespeare's works, Bleak House, Vanity Fair. And then, one day, Dear Annie, will you marry me? Proposed to in a letter. A grubby letter from a soldier's camp somewhere, a bit crumpled and dog-eared, too. It wasn't exactly how I dreamed of being asked for my hand in marriage. I hesitated. Writing to a soldier away at the front was romantic, but did I want to be married to a soldier? January 10th, 1863. I begin to think, Annie, that there will be enough fighting in the country to give us all plenty of occupation for the rest of our lives, even if they are not shortened by bullet or cannonball. Someone who might be shot through the head and lie rotting in a ditch somewhere far from home. as he had described the fates of so many to me. I don't think the soldiers are so much to be pitied as the fathers, mothers, wives, and sisters who have to stay at home. The anxiety some people must feel for their relatives in the army is a great deal worse, I think, than anything we have to bear. Someone who could not be home for holidays or birthdays. Someone who might never come home. I want to go home. I cannot tell you how much in February, but I do not see any chance of it now. He got an unexpected leave and came to Lenox in mid-January 1863, while news of the Emancipation Proclamation electrified the nation. We talked of binding ourselves to each other when he was finished with his duty. I told him I would wait for him. We knew how our parents felt, and we agreed that waiting was best. When Rob went back to the war, we were secretly engaged. January 25th, 1863. Dear Annie, since I have been at home, I have begun to think that the war may very possibly come to a more sudden end than I have hitherto supposed, unless there is a great change in the feelings of the people. What I saw and heard in public conveyances and hotels surprised me very much, and one would think that the men who have remained quietly at their firesides were the principal sufferers, to judge from their complaints. The Corps had a very hard march down. While it was so cloudy and threatening at Lenox, it was raining hard here. Many wagons were abandoned, and many mules sunk so deep in the mud that only their heads could be seen. So I am told, at least, but the story seems rather a startling one. You can imagine the difficulties of a winter campaign in Virginia. Dear Annie, I have thought a great deal of you, indeed almost all the time since I left Lenox, and of my visit to you, especially the last part of it. Oh, dear, you don't know how much I should like to see you again. Good night. With much love, your Bob. And then came the event which would change everything. You might say that destiny singled Rob out to make a choice, and his choice confronted me with a choice. Our decisions in those few days that winter tossed our lives into a racing current, hurtling us towards a fate we no longer had time to imagine. There are times when one must act without knowing what the consequences will be, without knowing what is right. Our hope, then, is that the character we have built throughout our lives will cause us to give the best we can. Stafford Courthouse, Virginia, February 4th, 1863. My dear Annie, Father has just left here. He came down yesterday and brought me an offer from Governor Andrew of the colonelcy of his new black regiment. The governor considers it a most important command, and I could not help feeling from the tone of his letter that he did me a great honor in offering it to me. My father will tell you some of the reasons why I thought I ought not to accept it. If I had taken it, it would only have been from a sense of duty, for it would have been anything but an agreeable task. Please tell me without reserve what you think about it, for I am very anxious to know. I should have decided much sooner than I did if I had known before. I am afraid Mother will think I am shirking my duty, but I had some good practical reasons for it. The hills about Lenox would be a very welcome sight to me, whether they were covered with snow, with grass, or with nothing at all. I want to see you horribly. That is the only word I can think of for it. but I have to console myself by looking at your portrait. Stafford Courthouse, Virginia, February 8th, 1863, dear Annie. You know by this time, perhaps, that I have changed my mind about the Black Regiment. After Father left, I began to think I had made a mistake in refusing Governor Andrews' offer. Mother has telegraphed to me that you would not disapprove of it, and that makes me feel much more easy about having taken it. Going for another 3 years is not nearly so bad a thing for a colonel as for a captain, as the former can much more easily get a furlough. Then, after I have undertaken this work, I shall feel that what I have to do is to prove that a Negro can be made a good soldier. And that being established, it will not be a point of honor with me to see the war through, unless I really occupied a position of importance in the Army. Hundreds of men might leave the Army, you know, without injuring the service in the slightest degree. Last night, I received your letter of February 1st. You must be at Susie's house now, at least I judge so from Mother's telegram. Do promise to stay there until I get to New York. You do not know how I shall feel if I find you are gone. It is needless for me to overwhelm you with a quantity of arguments in favor of the Negro troops, because you are, with Mother, the warmest advocate the cause can have. I am inclined to think that the undertaking will not meet with so much opposition as was at first supposed. All sensible men in the Army, of all parties, after a little thought, say that it is the best thing that can be done. And surely those at home who are not brave or patriotic enough to enlist should not ridicule or throw obstacles in the way of men who are going to fight for them. There is a great prejudice against it, but now that it has become a government matter, that will probably wear away. At any rate, I shan't be frightened out of it by its unpopularity, and I hope you won't care if it is made fun of. Dear Annie, the first thing I thought of in connection with it was how you would feel, and I trust now I have taken hold of it, I shall find you agree with me and all of our family in thinking I was right. You know how many eminent men consider a Negro army of the greatest importance to our country at this time. If it turns out to be so, how fully repaid the pioneers in the movement will be for what they may have to go through. And at any rate, I feel convinced I shall never regret having taken this step as far as I myself am concerned. For while I was undecided, I felt ashamed of myself, as if I were cowardly. With a great deal of love, more every day, your Rob. Three more years! Of course, it was clear that he had to accept this charge. Everything in his life had prepared him for it. Everyone in his family was so joyful. They fairly burned with pride when they spoke of what Rob would contribute to the cause of freedom. Something of their passion conveyed itself to me, and I was proud too, but 3 more years in the Army. I asked Rob never to keep my letters, and he respected my wish. But I remember one I wrote him. Dear Rob, I have thought about you every day since you wrote us of your decision. I hope this does not sound stupid, but I have felt afraid to answer you. I have so much in my heart for you, so much that I cannot write down. You must promise to burn this letter. If I thought that anyone else but you would read it, I would feel so ashamed. Promise you'll never show it to anyone. Darling Rob, I want to be yours, to be your wife. I don't want to wait for the end of a war which seems as if it will go on forever. I am filled with love and pride for what you have chosen to do, but I admit that I am afraid too. My heart pounds as I think of what it all means for us. 3 years more in the Army. No, we should not have to wait so long. I have asked myself how I will live with becoming your wife when you go away again into the battlefields, into danger, leading men who have never been tried in war. No matter what they say, we don't really know for sure, do we? I've decided that if you want it, then it's what I want too. I feel that I am so weak compared to your brave and patriotic family to worry about my happiness when you are taking on such a great mission. I stayed awake all night thinking about it, and this is the decision I have come to. The only contribution I can ever make to this cause is to love you and to stand beside you as your wife now, not later when all is safe and settled. There is your answer. I am yours forever. Remember to burn this, my dear Rob. Your Annie. Boston, February 16th, 1863. Dearest Annie, I have been at work all day, looking over papers with Hallowell and talking with Governor Andrew. Now that it is decided that colored troops shall be raised, people seem to look upon it as a matter of course, and I have seen no one who has not expressed the kindest wishes for the success of the project. With much affection, your Rob. P.S. Our recruiting is getting along well. February 18th. Do write to me often, Annie dear, for I need a word occasionally from those whom I love to keep up my courage. Whatever you write about, your letters always make me feel well, and I have enough discouraging work before me to make me feel gloomy. February 23rd. We have opened the camp at Reedville, got the barracks in good order, and sent 27 men out there. Captain Edward Hallowell is in command of the camp. Day before yesterday, he had all the men washed and uniformed, which pleased them amazingly. These 27 men are all from Philadelphia and Boston. From other recruiting offices, we hear very good accounts, and the men seem to be enlisting quite fast. All my mornings are spent in the State House, and as indoor, furnace-heated work does not agree with me, I shall get out to Reedville as soon as possible. Boston, March 3rd, 1863, my dearest Annie. Next Saturday I shall find you at Susie's, and I hope with your mind at ease and all your business wound up. For if you have 100 people to see and 50 errands to do, I shall be very much aggravated. Did I tell you that Uncle William Green had given me silver eagles for my shoulder straps? March 14th. I went out to Reedville yesterday morning and have just come in. Everything out there is going on prosperously. The company from New Bedford are a very fine body of men. And out of 40, only 2 cannot read and write. Their barracks are in better order and more cleanly than the quarters of any volunteer regiment I have seen in this country. Reedville, March 17th. Tonight, we received quite a large squad from Pittsfield. They seem to be very patriotic up there. We are beginning to get our men from Western New York and Canada now. Our recruiting agent up there says he can get enough to raise 2 or 3 regiments if the governor is authorized to raise them. I wish, Dear Annie, you were coming too. There is a blue-eyed, yellow-haired, white-skinned, black preacher out here who has great influence among the blacks. He wants to go as chaplain, and I think I shall take him. He looks so much like a white man that I don't believe there would be much prejudice against it. It would be out of the question to have any black field or line officers at present because of public sentiment. Good night, dearest Annie. April flew by. We settled on May 2nd as our wedding day. My parents raised their strongest objections, and Rob's mother, too. But we were determined, and they relented. We planned a week in Lenox at my family home, and then I would go to a small boarding house near Rob's camp in Reedville and stay there while he finished training the men. I remember our wedding trip so clearly. For one whole week, it seems as if time had stopped for us on the most perfect day of the year. Rob loved this farm and all the wild birds and the deer that would wander right up to the back door. One day, we saw one of our Berkshire black bears out in the meadow with 2 cubs, and Rob said it was like being in an enchanted forest. Every morning, we took drives through the country and long walks on shady paths, talking about our dreams and everything we loved together. Rob's sister Josephine sent us The Mill on the Floss to read. Rob told her we were more interested in our own ideas just then. And our nights. I remember the moment when we both stopped being scared, and I promised Rob I would never love anyone else but him. And it was true. We laughed all the time, and Rob told me stories about his boyhood, about Boston, and going to school in Europe, and meeting the great English actress and abolitionist Miss Fanny Kemble at a villa in Sorrento, Italy. He said none of it compared to us, and how happy he was right then. We didn't talk at all about the war, and for a week, there was no war at all. When I think of those days, it's like looking at a magic lantern show of a story that happened to someone a long time ago. And then the perfect week was over, and we went to Reedville. We thought we might have a month or 2 more before the 54th marched out to active duty, but on May 7th, Rob received a telegram that Governor Andrew had decided to send the regiment out May 20th. We returned to Boston May 11th. Rob went back to drilling and training the men all day, and I sat in the parlor at the boarding house and waited for him to come home in the evening. He would be tired and full of anxious worry for the regiment. How would they compare to white soldiers? Would the white soldiers accept them fighting side by side? Would the black soldiers run away as soon as the first shots were fired at them? We really did ask those questions. That was why black men like Frederick Douglass had spoken passionately of the necessity of the Negro to fight for the Union. His own 2 sons joined Rob's regiment. On May 18th, Governor Andrew presented the 4 regimental flags to the 54th before a huge crowd. 10 days later, the regiment marched through the streets of Boston, bound toward Battery Wharf. Thousands turned out. The streets were packed. I stood with Rob's mother and sisters on the balcony at 44 Beacon Street. From down the street, we heard the drums and Patrick Gilmore's military band. Then the 54th came into view. Rob was at its head on horseback, his sword drawn. As he passed by, he turned his head to us, lifted his sword, and kissed it. He smiled. I think he smiled at me. I waved. And then they were gone. As soon as transports were ready, the 54th Massachusetts Regiment shipped out of Battery Wharf for the Carolinas. It was May 28, 1863. We had been married 26 days. Steamer de Molay, June 1st, 1863, off Cape Hatteras. We have got this far on our voyage without accident, excepting the loss of Major Hallowell's mare, which died this morning and was consigned to the sea. We left the wharf at 4 p.m., having been detained nearly 2 hours in packing the arms. That night and the next day the sea was very smooth, but Friday evening the wind rose, and before long we had a very seasick cargo. I myself have not been ill at all. So I have done nothing but think over the events of the last 3 months. It is only 3 months and a half since I got to New York and you came down to see me. I hope I shall never forget the happy days we have passed together since then, and that I shall always look back on them with the same pleasure as now. May be a long time before we find ourselves driving about Berkshire together again. But I do hope that someday we can live over those days at Lenox once more, or even Mrs. Creehor's with a regiment close by to worry us would not be very bad. The more I think of the passage of the 54th through Boston, the more wonderful it seems to me. Just remember our own doubts and fears and other people's sneering and pitying remarks when we began last winter, and then look at the perfect triumph of last Thursday. We have gone quietly along, forming the regiment, and at last left Boston amidst a greater enthusiasm than has been seen since the first 3-month troops left for the war. Everyone I saw, from the governor's staff down, and they have always given us rather the cold shoulder, had nothing but words of praise for us. Truly, I ought to be thankful for all my happiness and my success in life so far. And if the raising of colored troops proves such a benefit to the country and to the blacks, as many people think it will, I shall thank God 1,000 times that I was led to take my share in it. I wonder where you are now, whether on the way to Lenox or already there. June 3rd, 10 a.m. We passed the blockading fleet off Charleston at 7 this morning and saw the top of Fort Sumter and the turrets of the ironclads. We expect to reach Hilton Head at about 3 this afternoon. Oh, dear, I wish you were with us. Did anyone tell you that after bidding you and Mother and the girls goodbye so stoically, Cousin Harry and I had to retire into the back parlor and have a regular girl's cry? It was like putting the last feather on the camel's back. I had as much as I could carry before. It was a great relief, though. Someday, we will make that journey we used to talk of, from Lenox through Springfield and Northampton. Remember all your promises to me. Go to bed early and take as much exercise as you can without getting fatigued. Your ever-loving husband. St. Simon's Island, Georgia, Tuesday, June 9th, 1863. We arrived at the southern point of this island at 6 this morning. I went ashore to report to Colonel Montgomery. You would be enchanted with the scenery here. The foliage is wonderfully thick, and the trees covered with a hanging moss, making beautiful avenues wherever there is a road or a path. June 12th. If I could have gone on describing to you the beauties of this region, who knows but I might have made a fine addition to the literature of our age. But since I wrote the above, I have been looking at something very different. On Wednesday, a steamboat appeared off our wharf, and Colonel Montgomery hailed me from the deck with, "How soon can you get ready to start on an expedition?" I said in half an hour, and it was not long before we were on board with 8 companies, leaving 2 for Camp Guard. At 8 a.m., we were at the mouth of the Altamaha River. We wound in and out through the creeks, twisting and turning continually and often running aground, thereby losing much time. Besides our 3 vessels, we were followed by the gunboat, Paul Jones. On the way up, Montgomery threw several shells among the plantation buildings in what seemed to me a very brutal way, for he didn't know how many women and children there might be. About noon, we came in sight of Darien. Beautiful little town. Our artillery peppered it a little as we came up, and then our 3 boats made fast to the wharves and we landed the troops. The town was deserted, with the exception of 2 white women and 2 Negroes. Montgomery ordered all the furniture and movable property to be taken on board the boats. After the town was pretty thoroughly disemboweled, he said to me, "I shall burn this town." He speaks always in a very low tone and has quite a sweet smile when addressing you. I told him I did not want the responsibility of it, and he was only too happy to take it all on his shoulders. So the pretty little place was burnt to the ground, and not a shed remained standing. Montgomery fired the last buildings with his own hand. One of my companies assisted in it because he ordered them out, and I had to obey. Some of our grape shot tore the skirt of one of the women I saw. Montgomery told her that her house and property should be spared, but it went down with the rest. The reasons he gave me for destroying Darien were that the Southerners must be made to feel that this was a real war, and that they were to be swept away by the hand of God like the Jews of old. In theory, it may seem all right to some, but when it comes to being made the instrument of the Lord's vengeance, I myself don't like it. Then he says, "We are outlawed, and therefore not bound by the rules of regular warfare." That makes it none the less revolting to wreak our vengeance on the innocent and defenseless. I reached camp at about 2 p.m. today after as abominable a job as I ever had a share in. Now, dear Annie, remember not to breathe a word of what I have written about this raid to anyone out of our 2 families, for I have not yet made up my mind what I ought to do. Besides my own distaste for this barbarous sort of warfare, I am not sure that it will not harm very much the reputation of black soldiers and of those connected with them. For myself, I have gone through the war so far without dishonor, and I do not like to degenerate into a plunderer and robber. There was not a deed performed from beginning to end which required any pluck or courage. If the inhabitants had done anything which deserved such punishment, or if it were a place of refuge for the enemy, there might have been some reason. If it were the order of our government to overrun the South with fire and sword, I might look at it in a different light. For then we should be carrying out what had been decided upon as necessary policy. But all I complain of is wanton destruction. After going through the hard campaigning and hard fighting in Virginia, this makes me very much ashamed of myself. Montgomery, from what I have seen of him, is a conscientious man and really believes what he says, that he is doing his duty to the very best of his knowledge and ability. There are two courses only for me to pursue: to obey orders and say nothing, or to refuse to go on any more such expeditions and be put under arrest, probably court-martialed, which is a serious thing. This was a terrible, terrible moment. The newspapers on both sides had a wonderful time with the story of marauding blacks burning and pillaging the property of whites in vengeance the first opportunity they had. Rob was a seasoned soldier who had seen action in some of the biggest battles of the war, but he was not trained for this sort of a fight in which the weapon is a deformed and twisted instrument that the cowardly call truth. It was perhaps the first time in my life that I ever felt hatred. Hatred for that man Montgomery, who sounded to me like a madman, even though it was later proved that Montgomery was acting on orders from a superior officer. I was in terror for my husband in the company of such a man. Nor was I prepared to face the consequences here at home. There was the shame of having our name dirtied in the papers, of having Rob's honor and the honor of his men questioned by prejudiced editors who had never been closer to battle than a telegram from one of their correspondents. But far worse was the look on my father's face, a look of such bitterness and sorrow. The worst fears of my parents had been realized, I think. My marriage had brought me shame. Rob's dishonor was my dishonor. I had pledged to stand by Rob no matter what was said of him, no matter who in our society slighted us. And there were those who slighted us because he took command of a regiment of black men. But I had not imagined something like this. And I admit, though I never expressed it to him, in my heart, I was ashamed of him. And I doubted him, doubted his judgment. He sensed my feelings, as he always could. My own darling wife, I am so sorry you have been worrying yourself about Montgomery and my connection with him. He commands the respect of all his superiors and is undoubtedly a man gifted with some great qualities. Don't think I am humbugged by Montgomery. I am not often enthusiastic, and what I say of him is not that kind. With all the love I have, your attached husband. I think the deepest wound I carry from the war is that he knew I doubted him at that most awful hour. In the midst of the furor over Darien, I received this. June 13th. Today, I rode over to Pierce Butler's plantation. It is very strange to think that Miss Fanny Kemble lived here once as a plantation owner's wife. The place is immense, parts of it very beautiful. There are about 10 of his slaves left there, all of them 60 or 70 years old. He sold 300 slaves about 3 years ago. I talked with some whose children and grandchildren were sold then, and though they said that was a weeping day, they maintained that Massa Butler was a good massa, and they would give anything to see him and Mrs. Butler again. They asked if we couldn't get their children back to the island again. These were all born and bred on the place, and even selling away their families could not entirely efface their love for their master. Isn't it horrible to think of a man being able to treat such faithful creatures in such a manner? These people could still love Pierce Butler, a slave owner, the man who had sold their children from them. And I let my own love be shaken by a few ignorant words in a newspaper, a disapproving look from my father. Love is not simple, and Rob reminded me of that. A deserted homestead is always a sad sight, but here in the South, we must look a little deeper than the surface. And then we see that every such overgrown plantation and empty house is a harbinger of freedom to the slaves. And every lover of his country, even if he have no feeling for the slaves themselves, should rejoice. St. Helena's Island, June 26th. We landed on this island last night and today are bringing everything to our camp a mile from the landing by hand. I have not yet heard what is to be done with the forces here. June 27th. The papers say there are about 20,000 colored troops in the service now. Just think what a change from 6 months since. June 28th. We have just had a 2-hour thunderstorm with such a wind that a good many of our tents were blown away. I think it is better, as you say, not to build too many castles in the air, for they are sure to blow away, like our tents. For that reason, I am more uneasy in camp than ever before, and always wishing for a move and something to occupy my mind in spite of myself. When we lie idle, as at present, I do nothing but think and think until I am pretty homesick. Shall we ever have a home of our own, do you suppose? Can't help looking forward to that time, though I should not. For when there is so much for every man in the country to do, we ought hardly to long for ease and comfort. I wish I could do my share. That I had as much talent and ability to give to it as I want. St. Helena's Island, July 5th, 1863, my own darling wife. When you get this, you will have been a good while without news from me, as the last mail was not allowed to go on account of the military movements in this department. All the troops, excepting the colored regiments, are ordered. All the troops, excepting the colored regiments, are ordered to Folly Island. There will be a grand attack on Charleston, I suppose. I feel very much disappointed at being left behind, especially after Montgomery was promised by General Gilmore that we should have our share in it. P.S. I sent you a box with some clothes and my old sword. James Island, July 9th. Just after closing my last, we were ordered away from St. Helena's Island and embarked on board the Chasseur. We sailed at about 3 p.m. without anything but India rubber blankets and a little hard bread, and arrived at Stono Inlet near Charleston Harbor about 1 o'clock this morning. We lay off the bar until 1 p.m. The sea was running very high all the time. In the night, it rained hard, and we all got a good soaking. About 2 p.m., we came to an anchor at the southern point of Folly Island, and Colonel Montgomery reported to General Terry. We now lie off the place where Federal troops landed last year in the attack on Charleston. The sail up the river was beautiful, the sun just sinking as we reached our anchorage. July 10th. Still on board our transport. The real attack will be on Morris Island from Folly. That began this morning, and the news from there is that General Gilmore has got all his troops on Morris Island and has possession of nearly half of it. Just now, the news of the fall of Vicksburg and of Lee's defeat has reached us. What an excitement there must be through the North. For my part, though, I do not believe the end is coming yet. The next mail will probably tell us that Lee has got away with a good part of his army. There is too much danger of our government making a compromise for peace to be entirely welcome now. Saturday, July 11th. This morning I got a paper from General Terry of July 7th, giving an incomplete list of the killed and wounded in the 2nd and 20th Massachusetts Regiments at Gettysburg. Poor Mudge is dead, I see. It will be a terrible blow to his family. You know, he was my captain when we first went out. But everyone must expect to lose their friends and relatives and consider themselves particularly favored by Providence if they do not. General Gilmore made an attack on Fort Wagner this morning and was repulsed. He will probably begin a regular siege now. Fort Wagner is halfway down Morris Island. Saturday evening. We landed at noon today and are now about 2 miles inland. July 13th. It has been very fortunate for me to have found so many old acquaintances here, as it has been the means of meeting a great many people who would have otherwise been disinclined to make the acquaintance of an officer commanding a black regiment. Our men are out on picket with the white regiments and have no trouble with them. One of my companies was driven in by a small force of rebels last night and behaved very well indeed. The rebel pickets called to us that they will give us 3 days to clear out. We have not had our clothes off since we left St. Helena. Officers and men are in the same boat. They will not allow any accumulation of luggage here. We got some ham for dinner today, which is an improvement on salt junk. That country place of ours is often before my eyes in the dim future. July 15th. My dearest Annie, you don't know what a fortunate day this has been for us, for me, and for us all, excepting some poor fellows who were killed and wounded. We have, at last, fought alongside of white troops. 200 of my men on picket this morning were attacked by 5 regiments of infantry, some cavalry, and a battery of artillery. The 10th Connecticut were on their left, and they say they should have had a bad time if the 54th men had not stood so well. The whole division was under arms in 15 minutes, and after coming up so close in front of us, the enemy, finding us so strong, fell back. We lost 7 killed, 21 wounded, 6 missing supposed killed, and 9 unaccounted for. General Terry sent me word he was highly gratified with the behavior of my men, and the officers and privates of other regiments praise us very much. All this is very gratifying to me personally, and a fine thing for the colored troops. It is the first time they have been associated with white soldiers this side of the Mississippi. To make my happiness and satisfaction complete, the afternoon brought your and Mother's letters. I have just come in from the front with my regiment, where we were sent as soon as the rebels retired. This shows that the events of the morning did not destroy the general's confidence in us. Goodbye, darling, for the night. I know this letter will give you pleasure because what we have done today wipes out the remembrance of the Darien affair, which you could not but grieve over, though we were innocent participators. You will have some satisfaction in telling it to your father. I got my horse, India rubber tube, and some clean clothes today. Your most loving husband. And then this. Coles Island, South Carolina, July 17th, 1863, 4 p.m. James Island was evacuated last night by our forces. My regiment started first at 9:30 p.m. Not a thing was moved until after dark, and the rebels must have been astonished this morning. It thundered and lightened and rained hard all night and took us from 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. to come 4 miles. By the time we got over, it was nearly daylight. We are now lying on the beach opposite the southern point of Folly Island and have been here since 5 this morning. When they can get boats, they will set us across, I suppose. There's hardly any water to be got here, and the sun and sand are dazzling and roasting us. I shouldn't like you to see me as I am now. I haven't washed my face since day before yesterday. My conscience is perfectly easy about it, though, for it was an impossibility and everyone is in the same condition. Open air dirt, that is mud, is not like the indoor article. I have had nothing but crackers and coffee these 2 days. It seems like old times in the Army of the Potomac. Goodbye again, darling Annie. Rob. July 18th, Morris Island. We are in General Strong's brigade. We came up here last night and were out again all night in a very heavy rain. Fort Wagner is being very heavily bombarded. We are not far from it. It wasn't until 2 weeks later that Mother and Father were able to tell me Rob was killed that night, leading his men in a charge on the walls of Fort Wagner. They say he was at the very front of his regiment of black soldiers. With his sword drawn, he gave the order to advance and then to charge. He climbed the steep wall to the very top of the fort's parapet. The men around him heard him call out in a clear voice, urging them forward. And then an enemy bullet struck him and he fell. All reports say that his men fought fiercely until they were forced to retreat by the savage enemy fire. The courage of black soldiers in battle has never been questioned again. For a while, there were rumors that Rob was only wounded and taken prisoner by the rebels. But at last, it was confirmed that he was dead. The Confederate soldiers threw all the bodies of the black soldiers into a mass grave. And they threw Rob's body in too. They saw it as a gesture of humiliation. When our families heard of this, we agreed that Rob should always remain buried with his men. His father wrote to the Army officials, "We find nothing to regret in Rob's life, death, or burial. We would not have his body removed from where it lies, surrounded by his brave and devoted soldiers." 3 months ago, I traveled down to New York to watch the departure of its 1st Black Regiment. And today, my mourning period is officially ended. Time for a new life to begin. I've made a decision, which is why I've asked you here, and I hope that you will understand. I'm leaving America. I will go to Switzerland for a while, and to France. Rob always spoke of his time there with such pleasure. Rob gave his life with courage for a great cause, knowing he was dearly loved. Now I would like to be in a place apart from war and great causes, in the places Rob was when he was so young and full of life as I remember him. This is a great land, so rich in every way. And yet, while Rob's black soldiers were fighting last July on Morris Island, 128 black Americans were killed in the draft riots in New York City. Some of them were family members of the soldiers in the 54th. While Rob's mother and sisters may campaign for liberty and justice for all, they cannot today cast a vote for the President of the United States. I love America, but it is not a simple love. And there's another love I want to honor now. One of Rob's fellow officers remembered that just before the final order to advance, Rob walked among his men and spoke with them, shook their hands with warmth and affection, and told them to prove themselves. The officer said that Rob was pale, and a slight twitching at the corners of his mouth plainly showed that the whole cost was counted. The whole cost. Rob, you are much like all of us who are young, in love with honor and ideals. We see the world through the eyes of our time, with the limitations of our time. You weren't perfect. Yet when the moment came to act, you rose beyond your limits. You gave the best you had, and it changed the world. The best I have to give you is to remember you and to share your memory with others. I am yours forever. Someday I'll come back here. Until I do, will you take care of this house for me? It's always been a safe place. I love it very much. I hope that you will value it as I have, and that you'll think of all of us sometimes. Of Rob, me and of the brave, the Massachusetts 54th.